Well, welcome to our first podcast.
Very first podcast.
Dan and Tom here from Janus Film Review. Two men and a dog, because we have a dog here as well.
Yes, hopefully she won't interrupt. But as I say, if she has something interesting to say, rest assured we will allow her her opinion, because obviously that's what we're all about.
Absolutely. So we're here basically to, hopefully be interesting and entertaining in our thoughts on various films. We have known each other for many, many years.
Approximately 30 years, to be precise.
Yes, that is a long time. And so our love of film and friendship has lasted that long. So some of you may already be aware that we have our Facebook page and our Twitter page and our website.
A lot of channels, boys and girls, a lot of channels.
Where we write reviews for films that take our fancy. It might be the most recent blockbuster. It might be something that we just enjoy and that we want to talk about. Lots of different films there. There's already loads of stuff we've got on there, isn't there, Dan?
There is. Yeah. As I say, we have also looked into separating things by genre or by type. As I said to you, we both of us have a particular interest and are willing to focus on science fiction as a genre. So we've authored a couple of pieces along those lines, and we'd like to do some more. I'd say we will explore the possibility of perhaps incorporating other specialised genres. But basically our intent with the Janus project is to talk about whichever film we choose, but also to have two opinions, to provide two insights into a particular thing, and to try and maintain a level of authenticity in the process. We're not for sale, I'm afraid. I'm sorry if that was in a situation like that. We like the idea of trying to provide an authentic opinion. Sometimes it will be quite technical, other times it will be quite emotional, but it will be sincere. That is very much our aim with it, whatever the film may be. And as I said to you, we've got no fidelity when it comes to particular genres. We will talk about anything that takes our fancy, and we are open to requests. If anybody would like to sort of mention or pick a particular thing, we will always consider it. Just a slight request. Try and be a little bit adventurous with your choices, because as much as we both like The Shawshank Redemption, I'm not entirely sure that there's a lot that we can add to that, for example, that hasn't already been said.
Yes. Another thing to note is, we have been asked, haven't we, that whether we are affiliated in any way to Janus Films, the actual film company of much repute.
Yes,
we are not. No.
Not in any way, sadly. As I say, we are proud of any English endeavour, one way or another, that has played a large and worthy role within the film industry. However, we are not in any way affiliated with them. So if you are particularly in love with Caligula, I'm afraid you might be slightly disappointed. I wouldn't rule out us talking about Caligula, because as you, it's not the best film ever made, but it might very well be the funniest.
Yes, perhaps the most entertaining.
Yes, unintentionally or intentionally, that's a matter of your own opinion.
Absolutely. So, welcome and thank you if you are listening, because, as we said, this is our first podcast. We hope the first of many.
Yes, indeed.
And we thought the best way to launch it would be through discussion of, spoiler-free discussion,
naturally,
of a film that we both went to see yesterday, which is Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yes, indeed.
Which has been, ringing a few bells, and I think it's been a popular choice already. I mean, I know of a lot of people in friends and other people who have seen it that I wouldn't have expected might go and see a film.
No, there's been some surprising interest in it. I think that the historical backdrop to it, obviously with the Manson family and a focus on poor Sharon Tate.
Yes,
I think that has appealed to people from that standpoint of an historical interest, but also those who have some vague memory and perhaps not so vague of that particular era in history, which obviously would be 1969 specifically. So as I said to you, it's had a slightly broader appeal than might otherwise have been the case. But rest assured, in case you were worried, and without offering any kind of spoiler whatsoever, it is very much a Quentin Tarantino film. It's got razor-sharp dialogue. It is very snappy, very witty, great performances, many stars, noteworthy, the sort who you think probably wouldn't be interested in such small cameos if it wasn't for the opportunity to be in a Tarantino film. And in case anybody was wondering, Tarantino's foot fetish is alive and well in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yes, absolutely.
So it is very much, in that regard, a quintessential Quentin Tarantino film.
I think the thing that struck me straight away was how it's almost 50 years to the day since the event. And I thought, I don't think that's...
I agree with Tom. I don't think that was an accident.
No.
much too much of a coincidence if that was the case. So as I said to you, it's very much a popular subject to kind of reference 50 years to the day. Obviously, there's been a lot of stuff going on with Apollo 11 and the moon landing. As I said to you, this has absolutely nothing to do with that. But as we say, another noteworthy event that occurred in 1969. Obviously, the use of a real-world backdrop is not completely unusual in a Tarantino film. Obviously, using Inglourious Basterds as an example, using the backdrop of the war and Nazi-occupied France. But in that instance, it was more of a vaguer, more just a backdrop setting. There was nothing specific about it. Obviously, with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it is directly referencing an event that at the start of the film is to come. But obviously, the focus on Sharon Tate, it's interesting because she has kind of become a bit of a footnote in what has been a very interesting life. And of course, I refer to Roman Polanski, who, rightly or wrongly, will forever remain a topic of conversation. But she was obviously married to him. And because of what subsequently happened to her, it got all enmeshed in the backdrop of the Manson family and her subsequent murder and obviously being married to Polanski. But she, as portrayed by brilliantly, I have to say, it's a very emotional but very physical performance. In so much as there's not a lot of dialogue on her part, Sharon Tate kind of haunts this film. Yes. The idea of her. And it is interesting because, as I say, she has kind of become a bit of an historical footnote in that regard. So Tarantino kind of embraces that idea, and we are presented a Sharon Tate who is something of an ethereal creature. We are given the opportunity to sort of hypothetically inhabit her feelings about the burgeoning nature of her career, the notion of her being pregnant, the aspects of her life which obviously would all go unrealized. And she is there as kind of, we go back and forth to her within the film. She is something that is, as I say, somewhat ethereal, but it is very, very nicely done. I think it's probably the best way to do it because Tarantino doesn't, through this film, attempt to get inside her head, which I think could potentially be disrespectful. And I do happen to know, having looked into it, that there was, through sort of a middle channel, there was communication between Tarantino and Roman Polanski in terms of how to go about it, the accuracy of it. And I think that generally speaking, the more cinematic interpretation of Sharon Tate was something which everybody agreed with.
Yeah, as we say, this will be spoiler free, but it's not giving too much away to say that Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt are sort of, it's a bit of a buddy comedy, really, isn't it?
Yes, that's quite a nice way to put it.
In the way that Leo plays Rick Dalton, who's been known for a TV show called Bounty Law, of which we see many clips, many amusingly, lovingly...
hammy and stylized and full of affection.
Absolutely. Whose career is sort of on the descendancy in a way that Sharon Tate's is on the ascendancy.
Yeah, so it's a nice juxtaposition in that regard.
Great performances. I was very impressed with Brad Pitt.
Yes.
I thought he was absolutely brilliant. For me, he was the performance of the film. I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio, it sort of goes without saying, really, that his performances of late have just been stellar across the board.
So DiCaprio was really good in the film, shock horror.
Yes, exactly.
It's really not surprising that you get a multifaceted, truly deep and meaningful performance from DiCaprio because he has an ability to embrace these quite heavy roles and lurch very happily and very capably from the intense and the very emotional, even doleful, to ebullient and happy and silly, and his range is remarkable. But there was something about Brad Pitt's performance. Again, it's quite a physical performance. Don't get me wrong, he has plenty of dialogue, plenty of outstanding lines in the film. He's extremely amusing whenever he opens his mouth. But there is a physical intensity to his performance, which quite frankly at points I don't think I've seen since Fight Club. That is something that aspects of the performance reminded me greatly of that.
And aspects of the tone of the film actually were quite reminiscent of that as well, I thought.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I was watching the film, I sort of caught myself under my breath. I can't remember precisely when, but I was even saying the sort of the legendary sort of mantra, do not talk about Fight Club, because it seemed apt. Brad Pitt's character is a bit of an enigma, and I say that was a term that Tom used last night, and I think it's absolutely bang on. I think that there is a really enigmatic quality to Brad Pitt's character and to his performance, because it's almost like the flicking of a switch.
Yes.
He seems to be quite a jocular, laid-back persona within the film, and then at the right moment, at the given time, he switches quite diametrically into something else, something very, very strong and impressive, and not necessarily what you expect. And it is I would say it's a vintage Brad Pitt performance. Again, I honestly couldn't pick the moment when I could recall. Oh, there we go. There's Georgie. Obviously agrees.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah, good.
I couldn't honestly pick the moment. I can recall seeing a performance from Brad Pitt as good as this. And obviously, citing Fight Club. I mean, Fight Club is 20 years old now, so it says a lot. It's not to say that Brad Pitt hasn't been in any good films or given any good performances since then, but this is the best Brad Pitt performance.
It's a standout. So you mentioned Fight Club. Another film that it felt very reminiscent of for me was Hail Caesar, Coen Brothers from a few years ago. Just in the terms of, that's very much set in the film, in the Hollywood world, comedic aspects to it. Now, I always get his name wrong. Alden
Ehrenreich.
That's the one.
Yeah.
I can never...
I don't know if it was Alden or Aaron, but I think it's Alden.
I'm sorry, Alden, if you're listening, which I'm sure you are.
Well, as I said, you insist every time you want someone to say your name, it's a form of sort of spaghetti Weetabix exciting. It's I don't know. As I said to you, it's a good name. It's a bold name for Hollywood. I think back in the golden days, they'd have told you to take that name and sell it to the Soviet Union. Quite frankly, let you use that. So
yeah, but his character is sort of a cowboy-esque character in that film, and there were elements of Leo.
Yeah, we're on first name terms. He's buying dog food at the moment. So.
There were elements of Leonardo DiCaprio's performance that reminded me of that. He's just like stutter to his words, and and I don't know whether that was intentional, probably not, but it was nice. It was a nice sort of reminiscence, I think.
There is an insecurity to the Dalton character, which is conveyed very effectively by DiCaprio, because that's a central part of the story. Again, without spoiling anything, because obviously in terms of this various synopses that have been presented, it's clear that DiCaprio's character is someone who is kind of on the outs in Hollywood, has peaked in terms of his career, and that's part of why we see aspects of his performances in the 50s in black and white to emphasise about that this is somebody who is, again, referring to the juxtaposition with Sharon Tate, one is on the ups, the other is very much on a downwards trajectory in terms of their career. As much as we say that this is, we're emphasising Brad Pitt's performance, I do think as much as we say that DiCaprio, it's obvious, it is a really, really good performance. And under any other circumstances, it would be his film. And I imagine that people who see this will argue that it is still his film.
Yes. Because
as I said to you, the intensity of Brad Pitt's performance is a rather quiet intensity. So there will be some people who might sort of think, well, he's blown out of the water by the lead. And don't get me wrong, this is DiCaprio is the lead, and his performance is absolutely brilliant. He takes what could be argued to be a typical Hollywood sack in Rick Dalton and makes him multifaceted and sympathetic.
And likeable.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. I say to you, there are a number of scenes, including, again, without going into too much detail, a very sweet conversation that he has with a very young lady, a co-star in the fictional drama in which we see Dalton quite lucky to get the role within. And it does a lot to re-establish the equilibrium of the character. But it's a very, very sweet scene. It's very, very well done. And again, it's another showcase of just wandering off on a mild tangent. I still remember when Martin Scorsese, about 15, 16, 17 years ago, described Leonardo DiCaprio as a second coming of Robert De Niro. I still think that Scorsese was wrong, but only because I think DiCaprio is better than De Niro. I think that DiCaprio has got a greater range than Robert De Niro ever had, because Robert De Niro is only really able to play Robert De Niro with the volume up or down. Whereas DiCaprio can inhabit a variety of different personas and can make you believe that he is the most loathsome creature that has ever walked this earth, or somebody who is actually quite sweet and vulnerable and someone you could potentially be invested in.
Yeah. And speaking of De Niro, of course, we have his his contemporary Al Pacino popping up for a brief cameo. And again, like you said earlier, perhaps a role that only Tarantino would be able to convince him to do.
Yes, I think so. It's I say Pacino is quite selective these days. I suppose he doesn't really need to worry about it. He's rich beyond all the dreams of avarice, and obviously his credentials as an actor and Hollywood credibility is absolutely unimpeachable. So you can cherry pick roles at this age and stage of your life, and I think the opportunity to have a role that obviously is kind of referencing the traditional firmament of Hollywood. I think there's not much to it. It's quite comical, and Pacino doesn't appear to just sort of phone it in. He goes along with it, gives it, and it's fine. As I said to you, the main scene between him and Leonardo DiCaprio, it's good fun.
Yeah. I've just been a little bit distracted while you've been talking there, Dan, because
I imagine you're probably not the only one.
And I was thinking there are some lovely cameos from Hollywood luminaries of the period.
Yeah.
All played with stunning accuracy. I don't want to give any of them away really, because I think one of them particularly, we both sat there and went, "That is uncanny."
Yeah, it's like what does a ginger Brit and one of the most stylish and iconic Hollywood leading men have in common? We'll watch the film. You'll find out.
Exactly. But one that did stand out for me, and I just had to double check that it was Nicholas Hammond as Sam Wanamaker.
Yes.
Now Nicholas Hammond, it was Friedrich in The Sound of Music. Only that is just a very interesting sort of link there. How
choice.
Can you how many degrees of separation is there from Tarantino to Sound of Music? But he stood out for me as, I think I said to you at the time, it felt like Bryan Cranston playing Bill Nighy playing Sam Wanamaker. And if you can imagine that, then that's what it felt like to me. Just great, because he was a force of nature, wasn't he, Sam Wanamaker?
He was.
Yeah.
And I said to you, just referencing your reference there, I said to you, it's fascinating because Bill Nighy only knows how to play Bill Nighy.
Yeah.
So you imagine Bryan Cranston playing Bill Nighy. It's one of those things that just thinking about that is interesting. I mean, reach for the whiskey, just try and contemplate that. But yeah, I mean, it's very, again, this goes back to the idea of it being a Tarantino film. Those kind of sort of eye-catching, quite dazzling cameos. You expect that from a Tarantino film, and this is obviously chock full of it. The other thing you expect of a similar gait is to see what could be referred to as members of Tarantino's crew. Yes. I think they're even referenced as such in the credits as his favourites, basically. Yeah. Sort of poking fun at the fact that people always say, well, such and such has got to be in it, and it is the usual suspects. And I mean, there's a brief role in there for Michael Madsen. I won't say when, but again, it's things like that, and obviously there's a little bit of Kurt Russell in there as well, which is never a bad thing.
Never a bad thing.
Again, none of these things are spoilers if you see them anyway. I mean, I'm not going to tell you anything about the roles or the characters or anything like that, but the whole point of this is that obviously you expect to see familiar faces, and in this regard, this film is pure Tarantino.
It is.
In that way.
And I come to this film as a bit of a Tarantino novice. I think we discussed that yesterday. But even I recognised that, for example, Michael Madsen, I think I turned to you during the screening and said, that's Michael Madsen, aware that he has that affiliation with the Tarantino films. So even someone like me who's seen 1.5 of them before this recognises those little traits and those little tropes that are in there.
I had to laugh at Madsen as well because he doesn't seem to have aged all that much in the last 15 years. He just looks like he's perhaps got a little bit fatter, which is not a crime that we can level at anyone as a crime, because obviously we're all a little guilty of it. So, but no, it's all very good fun. As I say, when you do see some of his familiar players, it's done in a way which obviously will make you smile. And it is consistent with that idea. As I said to you, I'm more of a confirmed fan of Tarantino films and of the sort of cinema, the way he wants to go about it. And as is very much the case with any Tarantino film, but particularly with this one, where it is firmly entrenched in a particular era in history, in Hollywood's history, hence the name of the film, there is a commitment to authenticity, which is quite breathtaking.
I was going to mention that. I mean, it lingers on those moments, doesn't it? Such as the cars, the fashions, the music. Although you made an interesting point that actually the music is less of a big deal than it has been in previous pictures.
I think in the sort of the first half, maybe even sort of 2/3. I mean, in the last couple of films, I think the impact of music has been dialed back a little bit in the Tarantino cinema. But in this film, again, it's one of the few Tarantino films where I was sat there watching. And don't get me wrong, the use of music is still very stylized. It's still important. But if you compare that to something like Pulp Fiction or particularly Kill Bill Volume 1, where the music is one of the things that stays with you most abundantly, it's more of a quieter, deliberate intent. It's an exercise in immersion. Because that's one of the criticisms, as much as people talk about the cool factor of the use of music within a Tarantino film, certain entities have criticised Tarantino for taking them out of their sense of immersion, because the music is almost jarring in that regard.
Yeah.
This commitment to almost having the image right along with the music. Some people sort of accuse that of being vaguely obtrusive, whereas in this one, the application of music in terms of diegetic and non-diegetic is very deliberate, but very specific. You get swept along with it very happily, and it's very well done, but it is more understated. And as I say, that was something which struck me. So,
and again, going back to the authenticity idea, it's there are many scenes of Brad Pitt driving in a car for extended periods of time, listening to the radio.
Yeah.
I mean, I think all of those things are in there to really, really bring you deep into the period. I honestly felt a big success of the film was making you feel like you were in 1969.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a high praise, I think, because
absolutely.
There were no sort of noticeable anachronisms. I think you mentioned there might be a few intentional ones, which is what Tarantino tends to do. But in general, you're sat there going, "This is the period." It's almost made in that period in a way.
I mean, Tarantino is known for taking some fantastical liberties when sort of approaching classical settings. And again, more towards the end of the film, he does do that, but it's very much to the advantage of the film, which we'll get to presently. But as I say, the level of commitment in terms of maintaining that sense of where you are, and more importantly, when you are, is absolute. In terms of, or on a slightly more specific or serious note, obviously, as we've already mentioned, and that's very much been emphasised in the marketing and in the pre-buzz for this film, is that fact that it is an original Tarantino story that is anchored to real-life events. And obviously, it's the murder of Sharon Tate and the Manson family, and obviously those two things are inextricably entwined. As I say, the depiction of Sharon Tate is very, very deliberate, very poised, and very understated. The film very deliberately doesn't focus on Roman Polanski for reasons that are very obvious. I felt that was very tastefully done. But the other side of it, which was always a possible avenue for difficulties in terms of depiction, would be the Manson family. And this film does not in any way glamorize the existence of the Manson family. They are not used in a sort of retrospectively cool or deliberately subversive way. They are shown to be exactly what they were, a bunch of perpetually stoned hippies dwelling in absolute squalor, who had been driven to the boundaries of lunacy by a little man with delusions of grandeur. And as I say to you, the depiction of the Manson family within this film, you get a sense of just how unhinged they were. But the use of them is not glamorous, it's not glorified, and it was always going to be a difficult thing, because Tarantino has been accused, obviously, of reveling in violence, of taking liberties with certain aspects of the character depictions for the sake of enhancing the story. He does not do that here with the Manson family. There are some sort of composite representations of figures within the family, and Manson himself is only seen very briefly within the film, which is good.
Which is interesting because he features in the trailer.
Yes.
So the impression you get is that he will play a big part in the film, but actually he doesn't.
The irony of his being featured in the trailer is kind of emphasising the point I was making, as issue is that marketing people want Manson in that trailer because they know that there are people who will be more interested because it's Manson.
Yeah.
Tarantino, who obviously is making the film, doesn't really care about going into detail about an odious little fool who is, waiting to die in prison. the impact of what he did is more through the actions of those who followed him, and the film sets that up perfectly.
Yeah.
There's no need to delve into the psyche of Manson because there's not a lot to say.
I mean, obviously the film is rated 18 in the UK.
Naturally.
Yes. But it was interesting because for most of the film, I was sat there thinking this could quite happily sit at the top end of a 15 rating.
Yeah.
Until the end.
Yeah, I said to you, it's kind of the usual Tarantino verve. There's some salty language, in which some very sharply written, very inventive. But you think to yourself, well, in terms of the 18, it tends to come down to what might be dubbed gratuitous violence to earn that rather dubious distinction. And the ending of this film, as has been mentioned, again, without going into any kind of detail, it is absolutely extraordinary. It has divided opinion a little for some people because of the way it ultimately plays out. Personally, I thought it was very, very well done. It is incredibly striking. It is really amusing from a somewhat darkly comical sense. But as I say to you, it suits the film very well, even though, as I say to you, it is something of a transition.
It is. It's a very, very abrupt transition as well. I mean, I think the reaction of the audience in the cinema was that of utter disbelief, but very amused disbelief, because it's the only thing you can do is laugh.
Yeah, I mean, to be more accurate, they were pissing themselves laughing. let's not beat around the bush with that. They were. I mean, when we were too. I mean, I was howling with laughter at one point. I mean, as I say to you, there's certain things in it in particular which are just
ridiculous.
Yeah, ball-breakingly funny.
Yeah,
just really, really good. I mean, the ending to the film is arguably the kind of crowning off of the crowning achievement, the topping off of that film and of Tarantino as a filmmaker. It is wild and outlandish and vaguely ridiculous, yet it is completely apt. It's quite poignant. It gets the central point that he is trying to make in terms of the relationships to the characters within the film. It's absolutely ideal. It really does work well. Just one thing I want to say is, because obviously we talk about different controversies, there was one other little aspect of controversy within the film which I think we'd like to address, and that was the depiction of Bruce Lee.
Yes.
Within the film, because Bruce Lee's daughter has sounded off, and one or two others who were acquainted with Lee in his lifetime, they have argued that the depiction of him is vaguely disrespectful in places. I think with a Tarantino film there is a certain license for dramatic accentuation, and there are two types of people when it comes to Bruce Lee. There are those who kind of worship at the altar of this mysterious and long departed entity who was one of the great icons of kung fu and of martial arts, and there are other people who frankly are not that bothered, who see him as what he was, which was a very talented human being, and a human being for all accounts who had a bit of a reputation for being a little bit full of himself. There are plenty of accounts to substantiate that notion. And I don't think that Tarantino in any way, and again, this is just my personal opinion, I don't think he crosses the line in the way that he plays. I mean, it's a bit of fun. Bruce Lee within the film, I think he's allowed to sort of get his rhythm back. But as I said to you, I didn't think that was an offensive portrayal of Bruce Lee at all.
And actually within the narrative, it's a bit of a sort of fantastical section of the film anyway. So it is a very much a heightened experience and a sort of caricature in a way.
Mm. And if anybody out there, just to linger on this point a little more, if anybody out there genuinely believes that Quentin Tarantino has some kind of issue with Bruce Lee, I would suggest that they watch Kill Bill Volume 1 and sort of reconsider that opinion. Because the build-up to that film, the outfit that the bride wears, so much of the iconography within the latter section of that film, right down to the use of the Green Hornet theme, which is a very deliberate choice, it is a loving homage to Bruce Lee, even though the film is set in Japan. So Tarantino goes out of his way to do that. So this whole notion of him disrespecting Bruce Lee is, quite frankly, ridiculous. But there we are. And in terms of providing a summation, and I'm sort of answering the burning question as to whether or not you should go and see it, whether or not you are a Tarantino fan, I think you probably should. It's an incredibly entertaining motion picture. It's brilliantly written. It's got an absolutely razor-sharp script. Even by the standards of a Tarantino film, there are many sort of asides and exchanges within it which are eye-wateringly funny. It's beautiful to look at. I mean, nobody does the sort of geekish commitment to authenticity of a particular era that Tarantino does. He finds excuses to work all sorts of cute little references to pop culture ideas within it. I mean, as a visual spectacle, it cannot be denied. And as a drama, as an emotional film, it works very, very well. I mean, if you like Tarantino, you will have no problems whatsoever. In fact, I would go on to say that this is my favourite Tarantino film in a long, long time. I really, really liked it. I thought it was absolutely superb. Beat perfect from start to finish. It doesn't really lag. And as I say, towards the end of the film, Tom turned to me and goes, I can't believe that's been 2 hours or however long it was.
2 hours, 40 minutes.
2 hours and 40. It's long, but it sure as hell didn't feel like it.
No.
And that is usually a very, very good sign. And I think it is in this instance. And as I say to you, if you're not a Tarantino fan, as Tom will elaborate here, there's still plenty to enjoy.
That's right. I came to this film with expectations of I think I will enjoy it. It's a period of history that I am personally very interested in.
It appeals to a film buff.
It does. Yeah. It absolutely does. And it also appeals to a history buff.
Yeah.
I have a friend who is a massive Tarantino fan and is also has a history degree. And so she loved it. I'm not usually a fan of ultra violence in movies. It's not something. Not something I find particularly entertaining.
And
but
it's invariably gratuitous.
It is. But having said that, having invested in the characters, having invested in the story, having found a great affection for Rick and Cliff, Leonardo and Brad in this instance, I was fully on board when that happened. Yeah. I just thought, actually, this moment, why did I not expect it when it's a Tarantino film? From all the things that I've heard about Tarantino films, and I look forward to going back through his back catalogue, I have to say, I look forward to enjoying his other films. It just became, I was fully on board with it. And as Dan has rightly said, it didn't feel like 2 hours 40 minutes.
No, not even remotely.
And I think, there were moments where I sat there going, okay, yes, we've lingered on Brad driving a car for a good 3 minutes here. In any other film, this would be, the editor would have said, we need to take that out.
Some of the conversations as well, sort of along these lines. In a Tarantino film, you get to sit and have a quiet conversation about minutiae, about bullshit, frankly. But with other filmmakers in other types of film, you would be expected. I mean, that would be a foremost victim in the editing room. But with Tarantino, it's part of what you expect.
It's part of creating the world. And in other worlds as well, the Bruce Lee sequence would have been a deleted scene. That would be something that would end up on the DVD as a little oddity extra.
Something that people would be very curious about because obviously it's a depiction of Bruce
Lee.
But
for Tarantino, it's integral to the film. So, as someone new to Tarantino, I greatly enjoyed it. If you're not a fan of ultraviolence, brace yourself. That's all I will say, because there are,
it's stylized.
It's stylized.
Yeah, as I said to you, as I said to you with Alexander Delage, Malcolm McDowell, the old ultraviolence that is designed to be ultraviolent. This is ultraviolent, but it's with its tongue in its cheek and with a smile on its face, and you do laugh yourself hoarse at it because it is so absurdly overdone.
Yeah.
But it suits. That's the. I suppose that's in many respects a perfect summation of the magic of Tarantino. This is a film that is very credible from a dramatic standpoint, but then lapses very happily and very deliberately into the most outlandish comic book-esque representation you can think of. And yet these two strange bedfellows, they sit very happily side by side, and it works wonderfully.
It does. Thank you so much for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed our first foray into the podcast. There will be more on the way. And as Dan said, if there's any films that you think are worthy of discussion, and there will be many, this is a good forum for us to have a chat about them and for you to be involved and share your opinions too. So thank you very much for listening to Janus Film Review.
Thank you very much. And if you haven't enjoyed it, then we've just wasted 40 minutes of your time and we apologise.
But there we go. Hopefully we haven't. So we'll see you again.
Amen.
Amen.